Here is why you feel you're failing at parenthood. Parenthood has changed drastically over the years. Our parents' generation often followed this tough love approach. The focus was on discipline, obedience, and resilience. And while right now we recognize that some of the widespread advice at the time that they followed with good intention has backfired on our generation because that's the parenting that we received as kids, we have swung to the complete opposite direction. We don't want our kids to feel neglected or emotionally stifled or unheard. And so, what we've done in order to counter that is to become hyper aware, hyper present, and often hyper involved. The result? A generation of parents who are drowning in guilt, constantly questioning if they are good enough, and stretching themselves so thin that their identity is barely recognizable. So, how do we find a middle ground? How do we show up for ourselves and our children without guilt? That is what we're talking about today. Hi there. If this is your first time here, welcome to the Parenthood and Relationship Podcast. I'm your host, Markela Kaplani, a psychologist, a parenthood and relationship coach, and a parent myself. Together, we explore the transformative journey of parenthood and its profound impact on our relationship with ourselves, our partners, and our children so that we can be present and show up as we envision without having to do more. Let's get into today's episode. Before diving in, just a small reminder to sign up to my newsletter if you want to be getting exclusive tips that accompany this podcast and give you ways in which you can apply the things that we talk about here today. Sign up at markelakaplani.com/newsletter or find the link below in order to do that. Let's get started. To understand where we are today and why we feel the way that we do, because I'm sure you've realized that you're not the only one who feels like you're failing at motherhood or at fatherhood. There are so many mothers and fathers around you, surrounding you, that are sharing a similar story. They feel like they're not doing well enough. Not as parents, and maybe not even in other fields as well. So as much as they might want to feel like they're competent in something, that at the very least they're still as great as they used to be at their job, or they are amazing parents, they feel like they're falling short in so many areas because, well, of course, their energy and their attention is divided. So you're not the only one feeling this way. Just from the amount of podcasts and seminars and workshops being done talking about how we don't feel good enough and how we can rebuild our level of self-confidence and self-competence, you know that you're not alone in this. But why is this happening? Why do we turn to our mothers and talk about how we feel and get the impression that they feel quite good about how they performed as parents? Do you ever get that? Because I hear that a lot. And I personally haven't honed in on this too much, but it could be the reluctance of that generation to ever apologize to their children, to ever self-reflect because they were too fearful of looking at what they might potentially have done wrong. But it could also be that they truly felt like what they did was good enough and that was okay. A lot of us in this generation are quite envious of the fact that they can tell you with a straight face, and they really do seem to believe it, that they've done a good job. When we feel like we're always drowning or half drowning, trying to do our best, but always nitpicking at every little thing that we have done wrong and thinking of how could I have messed my kid up? What could they have now that they're going to bring to their therapist a few years down the line? Most of us were raised at a time where parenting followed a completely different playbook. Back then, the approach was very clear. Parents were the authority, and questioning them was seen as disrespect. Discipline was top priority, often at the expense of emotional expression. Emotions were dismissed rather than explored because what's the point in focusing on that anyway and making it bigger than it ever had to be, right? Just think about the messages that most of us grew up with. Because I said so. That was the answer to why. Why not? Why should we do that? No discussion, no explanation. Or the fact that there was no space for emotions. Stop crying or I'll give you something to cry about. That's an all-time favorite. In Greece, it's very common for parents of that generation to have said, if you get hurt, I'll give you a beating. So not only will you fall and get hurt, I will hurt you on top of that because you didn't listen when I told you not to run. We were also taught not to be vulnerable, even to girls, like toughen up. Back then, the focus was raising obedient kids, not necessarily healthy ones, but in our parents' defense, they thought that they were doing the right thing, that by raising us to be obedient, they were raising us to be disciplined, and that by raising us to be disciplined and to respect authority, we would get ahead in life and we would learn to become resilient, and that this was the best gift that they could give us. And experts were the ones saying things like this. It was experts back then that were telling them that this is the best way to go. If you recall, that was the flourishing of the behavioral psychology era. And so it was all about fixing a certain type of behavior that was deemed problematic instead of looking at the emotion by modeling what's the right thing to do, by giving some kind of a reward, or by enforcing some kind of punishment or consequence. But then it was like really just punishment, and that was totally okay. In fact, it wasn't okay if you didn't punish your children. It wasn't okay if you didn't model the good behavior, because then you were raising little anarchists. And if we really think about it, at the time, it really seemed like this was effective because kids did behave. Parents instantly got the desired result, for the most part. Their kids got good grades. Other people told them how great and good and kind and quiet kids that they have. Their children met all their expectations. But love felt conditional, based on how good you were or how well you met parental expectations, how you fit the mold. Basically, while it all seemed good on the surface, as children, we received the message that love is conditional, and many of us experienced deep-seated wounds that we carry to this day. And that is what we want our kids not to have to experience. We learned to suppress our emotions. If we were upset, we were told to shake it off. If we were frustrated, we were told to stop complaining. We weren't taught how to process emotion, just how to stop it, how to suppress it. And so, it's not a surprise that many of us are people pleasers, and many of us keep an emotional distance. Some of us became really high achievers, constantly trying to prove our worth. Some of us developed a struggle with intimacy because we were never taught that vulnerability was a good thing. Some of us still feel the pressure to earn love because we don't think we just deserve it. And so many of us in this generation find that even though we mentally know that our parents loved us and they cared for us and they did everything they could for us, in most situations, of course, we don't have this emotional depth that we would have wanted to have with our parents. We cannot be vulnerable. We cannot be fully ourselves. We still seek their approval somehow. So when we became parents, we knew we wanted to do things differently. Knowing how we wanted to feel with our parents, we decided that we want to give that to our children. But in an effort to avoid that, we have come to overcorrect. We went from little to no emotional validation to constantly monitoring our children's every little emotion. We went from parent-first households to child-centered everything. And while our intention was and is good, the result? An exhausted, anxiety-driven version of parenting that's leaving us depleted and our children unprepared for life's challenges. I know it sounds rough, but if you really look around you, isn't that what's happening? Aren't all parents on edge? Aren't there so many memes and reels out there badgering the youngest generation for being underskilled, careless, and fully unprepared to take care of themselves as they enter adulthood? So as we've become a generation of hyper-aware parents, so tuned in to our children's emotions and their behaviors and their thoughts, we carry the constant load of, am I doing this well enough? And because of that, we struggle to let them experience discomfort. They fall, they scrape their knee, we rush in. They're bored, we rush to entertain. A tough emotion, we try to fix it immediately. Make an activity out of it. But here's the thing, struggle is how we grow. Resilience doesn't come from avoiding frustration. It comes with sitting in frustration and figuring it out. And while many of us think that's what we're doing, we think that by sitting there and analyzing all the emotions and discussing every little detail is where we're letting them sit in the frustration. A lot of times, unknowingly, we overreact to the emotion that the child is having. And so, in trying to teach them that they are capable of handling the emotion, just the mere fact that we stepped in so quickly, that we made such a big deal about it, which in certain cases is unnecessary, is telling the child that they cannot handle their own emotions. And that emotions are scary because mommy or daddy is frantically stepping in every time. In trying to be different, we have also internalized the narrative that we have to sacrifice our needs and ourselves in order to meet their needs. So the previous generation really was very parent-centered. The kids had to adjust to the reality that existed before them. And as such, a lot of times kids felt like they were a burden. And we carry that into adulthood today. But this is what I meant before when I said overcorrecting. Now the household runs around the children. And so we as parents are running on empty. We are so exhausted because we've been taught that good parenting means being available all the time. Good parenting means tending to every single need that our child has at the moment that they have it. We give and we give and we give until there's nothing left for ourselves. But the reality is that self-sacrifice isn't synonymous to love. A depleted parent is not a more loving parent. In this overcorrection, we are living in constant guilt. No matter how much we do, it never feels good enough. We replay every decision, second guess every choice. We worry about screen time, food choices, discipline methods, stimulation levels, and the pressure is relentless. 24/7, we're running on the question, am I doing enough? Which is robbing us of the opportunity to experience fulfillment in our parenting journey. A lot of parents will tell me, I expected this to be a happier time for me. I expected this to be fulfilling. Hopefully not all fulfilling, because in itself that's an issue. But I expected to love this parenthood gig. I wanted to become a mom, I wanted to become a dad, and I expected to absolutely love it. Regardless of the challenges, I expected that I would be able to find some kind of enjoyment, but I don't. And I feel guilty about it, and I feel sad about it. And I just feel like every day I'm just making it through. And I don't want that. Why is this happening? Well, because we are overcorrecting. And that's part of the process. When the pendulum was on one side, on the very end, it's going to naturally have to swing all the way to the other side before it reaches the center. And right now we're riding the wave of the other side. But if we're ever going to reach some form of balance, we need to start becoming aware that this isn't it. We have not reached balance. Because we really think that because we're doing everything so differently from how it was done before, that we're on the right path. And so long as we think that, we are going to keep on trying to excel at what we're doing now, at our own expense, and at our kids' expense. Because if this was actually really good for our children, if the end result was this amazing, resilient, so happy and mentally stable generation, yes, let's espouse self-sacrifice. We've learned to do it anyway. We've been taught how to run on seeking approval and doing everything for everybody else in order to be loved. But this isn't helping your children either. In this overcorrection, in this hyper-focus on being different than our parents' generation, we start to lose touch with everything else that matters. We start to lose touch with ourselves, and we start to lose touch with our partner. Because both of us are so hyper-focused in being great parents that we just start co-parenting rather than being together as partners. This is causing a lot of relationships to crumble as a couple enters parenthood. So I'm not going to go into that very much because there are several episodes that I can link in the show notes that talk about how intimacy dwindles when we become parents, especially in the first year. The statistics are very grim about marital satisfaction in the first years of having children. But I did want to make a point of how this overcorrection is at the expense of our relationship to ourselves and our relationship to our partner, which in essence then leads to a higher divorce rate, higher separation rate, which again, how does this really help our children? It doesn't. And even if we don't officially separate and we don't officially divorce, if our children are seeing two parents who are just parents, what are we teaching them? What are we teaching them about how two people relate so that then they can have a healthy relationship as they grow up? What are we teaching them about taking care of themselves and having something besides parenthood as their main focus? Is that how you want your child to be as an adult? To lose themselves into one thing, whether that be parenthood or that be a job? We don't typically consider this to be a good thing. But if you take a step back and you think about your child, would you want them to hyper-focus on only one area in their life? Would you want them to only be focused on their relationship with their partner so that they ruin their relationship with their family, so that they can't work, so that they have kids but their kids are neglected? Would you want them to only focus on work so that their marriage falls apart or that their children feel neglected or that they neglect their body and their needs and they become unhealthy and sick? No. But somehow it's okay for you to hyper-focus on parenting. It's okay for you to put your needs in the back burner. It's okay for your relationship to have to wait until the kids are older. Why? And is that what we want to be modeling? Because while we don't want to be focusing only on behavior, as noted before, there are parts of behavioral psychology that are helpful and are very valid. We are modeling relationships in the way that we relate to them, to our children, and in the way that we relate to ourselves, how we take care of ourselves, and in the way that we relate to our partner. So if we're only really focused on the relationship that we have with our children, and since our children see us as gods and as experts at everything, at least until a certain age, then it's quite possible that this is exactly the way that they are going to be when they have a family. Or they are going to overcorrect, and then they may become very self-centered and selfish, neglectful even. Who knows? So ironically, in trying to protect our children by focusing on them and their needs and their emotions, we are creating challenges for them. They struggle with independence. They don't know how to problem solve. They don't feel like they're resilient enough. They fear failure because they haven't learned to sit in it. They internalize our anxiety because kids are our mirrors. If we are constantly stressed and guilt-ridden, they pick up on that energy. And of course, they don't see a healthy model of adult life. We show them that parenthood means losing yourself. And then this is what they will expect of themselves and of their experience as they become parents. So they may avoid it altogether. No wonder why there are more and more people who are deciding consciously not to have children. And some of them would have never wanted to, and that's totally fine. But I do wonder if a lot of people who choose not to have children are choosing it because they truly don't feel called or because they're fearful of what that means in terms of how they will relate to themselves and their partners, of what that means as sacrifice, of what that means in terms of what they will have to lose. It's like overwatering plants. You do it out of love, you're taking care of them, you're watering them, but their roots will eventually rot. It's the same for our children. If we're constantly giving them our presence, our attention, our whole selves, we aren't necessarily helping them grow. Sometimes we are making them less capable of thriving on their own. And no, we don't have to get to where our parents were, because with this kind of logic is where our parents just threw us to the curb and said, you can do it. Because they were taught that this will make us more capable. We don't have to be that. There is a middle ground. So if the old way wasn't ideal, and if the new way is leaving us drained, what do? How do we find that balance? The first and most important step or way to do this is to shift our perspective on what we think is necessary. Guilt has become the default setting for most parents. We feel guilty when we set a boundary. We feel guilty when we take time for ourselves. We feel guilty when we're not perfectly patient and regulated at every point in the day. But here's the thing, guilt isn't always a sign that you're doing something wrong. Sometimes it's just a sign that you're doing something differently. that you're breaking patterns, that you're learning. And even if it is a signal that you're doing something wrong, it's really important to reconsider the definition of wrong. Is it truly wrong? By what standards is it wrong? To what degree is it wrong? So I invite you from now on, instead of asking, is what I am doing good enough? Start asking yourself, is what I'm doing sustainable? Is it modeling the type of life that I actually want my kids to have? Because if we don't want our children to feel guilty for taking care of their own needs, we need to start showing them that it's okay to take care of themselves by doing that for ourselves. The second way is to start to understand that emotional resilience does not mean taking care of everything and running behind our children's every need. At some point in our intent to build emotionally resilient and intelligent children, we started tending to every single thing so that we can teach them, so that this can become a learning experience for them. What we didn't realize is that we were showing them that feeling sad and feeling angry and feeling all these things is scary, and we need to talk about it, and we need to tend to it at all times, and we need to make a big deal out of it, and we need to fix it. Why are you sad? Let's fix it. We need to let them sit in it before we have the discussion. We can let them feel the failure and come out of it knowing that in the end, nothing bad happened. So in essence, what I'm saying is that we need to validate their feelings without making it our job to remove them from discomfort. Life is going to present them with many hard moments. So the goal is not to make sure that they never struggle. The goal is not to make sure even that they overanalyze the emotion and start to psychoanalyze why did this happen and what was the thought that led to it and what could be the wound that is happening. We don't want them to be doing all of that. We don't want to raise a generation of overthinkers, do we? The goal is to help them know that emotions are a signal, that we can sit in them, that the discomfort is not forever, that they're not going to die, and that they can regulate themselves and figure out what to do. Another important thing, and a lot of people laugh it off, but I want you to really look deep inside and truly consider whether this is the case for you too. It's really, really important to disassociate unconditional love from self-sacrifice. A lot of parents will tell me that that's not an association that they're making. But if you start to really self-assess, you may find that your actions are showing something completely different to what you're saying. Somewhere along the way, we convinced ourselves that since our grievance with our parents was that they didn't necessarily spend enough time with us, that they didn't necessarily understand the value of being present, that we have to be constantly available to the detriment of our needs, of our identity, of our relationships with everybody else around us. But a strong, loving parent doesn't have just one value, and that value being raising my kids well. A strong, loving parent is one who presents a full life, who has multiple things that they value, who doesn't just serve a boss, serve the children, serve the household, but also lives a life that is full, that is happy, that is rich. So again, instead of asking yourself, am I doing it right? It is much more helpful to ask, am I modeling the kind of life that I hope my children will have? I don't want my children to be overextended, putting themselves last. So why is that what I'm showing them every single day? I want them to have a fulfilling life, including parenthood, if they choose to become parents. And if I believe that this is the standard that they deserve, don't I deserve it too? And if I am God to them, and as God I think that the best way to live is to put myself last, then isn't that what they are going to internalize? So I want you to make space for yourself without feeling guilt. I know this is hard. The idea of taking time for yourself might feel selfish. And this has been drilled inside our heads for such a long time. But your kids need to see you taking care of yourself. Your kids need to see you in different capacities. And your kids deserve to see you happy. I was having a session just yesterday with a client, and she was telling me how basically she has become the happiness bearer for the family. From a very young age, she had to learn to read the room And so she's rewarded for being empathetic, but it's a trauma response. She was living in such a volatile emotional environment that she needed to know when things weren't stable. And she felt like it was her responsibility to appease her mother when she was mad or when she was sad, because her mother never took responsibility for her emotions. Her mother never did something about them. And maybe her mom had decided that this is my life, that this is me being a good parent, that I put myself last and I self-sacrifice. You can't hide how draining this is. You are going to be sad and you are going to be mad if this is the way that you live constantly every single day. But do you see what it did to that child? Now fully grown into an adult who learned that she had to be the one who would have to uplift the mood, whether that be by following every single thing that her mom said to the letter so that there was no room for her to be unhappy or to get mad, or by not being too happy because that would offend her mom who couldn't stand too much happiness. When we don't tend to our emotions because we're putting other things and other people and our children first, our children decide that it's their job to tend to our emotions. That since mom is doing such a great job for me and she's trying so hard and she's so loving and taking care of me, I have to take care of her because I don't see her happy. But that is not your child's burden to carry. Your emotions are your responsibility. And by putting yourself last, you are not tending to your emotional world. And you are giving them a job that is not theirs to have. So if nothing else was convincing enough from what I said today on this podcast, let it be that. You're not responsible to fix everything for your children. You are not meant to always be there for them every minute of every day. And hell, you're not even supposed to be happy all the time. But when you're unhappy, when you are mad, it's your responsibility to tend to those emotions. And if you are self-sacrificing, if you are there 24/7, if you're exhausted, depleted, drained, I'm willing to bet that you are not able to truly regulate. You are going to be sad, you are going to be mad, you're going to be frustrated, you're going to be disappointed, and all of that is something that your kids pick up on. It's something that they don't like, and it's something that they will try to fix because our kids feel like they are responsible. They feel like it's their fault. So if you're going to do something specifically in order to be a good parent, let it be that. Let it be that you find ways that make you happy, that help you self-regulate. And let that be without guilt, because a lot of the things that are going to make you happy and are going to help you start regulating your nervous system and your emotional world are going to be things that don't involve your children, and that's okay. You're not going to suddenly be unavailable. Trust me. But of course, if you are with them 24/7 or most of the day, and now all of a sudden you start spending an hour to yourself or half an hour to yourself every day, that is a drastic change and it's going to feel very uncomfortable for you. That's okay. You can learn to sit in the discomfort as well. You've been taught to do it anyway, haven't you? So as a fifth suggestion, basically what I'm trying to say is that you can let your kids struggle just a little. You can be there for them, you can be there with them, but try not to resolve things with them and for them every single time. Give them age-appropriate freedom to make mistakes, to feel disappointment, and then to problem solve and to build self-confidence in their abilities. This doesn't mean stepping back entirely, abandoning them. It means stepping back just enough. Enough for them to feel supported, but also capable. Enough for you to be attentive, but to also have room and space and energy to tend to your emotions too. I love this quote by Carl Jung. The greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of the parent. Our kids don't need us to be martyrs. They don't need us to disappear into our role of parent. They need to see us as whole people because that gives them permission to be whole too. They need to see us happy and content because that gives them permission to be happy and content as well. So here's the big takeaway. Parenthood is not about having to choose whether I'm going to be fully detached or fully available. It's about knowing when to show up and when to step back, not just for our kids, but also for ourselves. And that these are interrelated, they're interdependent. And I know this is so much easier said than done. Finding the balance and knowing when it's the best thing to step back is so hard. I have spent years believing that good parenting is giving your full self and magically thinking that you can also give your full self to your job and to your relationship and to your hobbies, not realizing how unrealistic that is until I became confronted with a demoralizing decrease in my self-confidence and self-esteem. Because while the expectation was impossible, somehow, somewhere in my brain, I thought that it was feasible and that only I couldn't achieve it, which led to me being always very disappointed in myself, constantly in a very stressed out mood and very unfulfilled. If you have spent years thinking that putting your child first is the best way to parent, it can feel unnatural or even impossible for you to shift your way of thinking about it now. But this shift doesn't have to happen all at once. You're not expected to listen to this episode and suddenly be convinced. Still, with some patience and some work, you will get there. If you're interested in taking that first step, make sure that you've signed up to my newsletter at markelakaplani.com/newsletter. You can also find the link in the description and the show notes so that I can send you some reflective questions that you can start to ponder on. And if you type your answers in, make sure to click reply and send them to me. That is, if you want to and if you feel comfortable to. I reply to every single email, and I would love to know where you are at this point in your journey. So, if you're feeling stretched thin, if you've been questioning if you're good enough, take a breath. You are enough. Not because you're getting everything right. You aren't, I can guarantee you that. But because you care enough to be here, reflecting, growing, and showing up with intention. And that's what makes you a great parent. Thank you for spending this time with me on the Parenthood and Relationship podcast. If this resonated with you, share it with a fellow mom or a fellow dad who may be too hard on themselves. And leave me a review on Apple Podcasts. It helps me spread my message and help parents feel more light and more confident and more connected. As always, take care of yourself, take care of each other, and I'll see you next Sunday. Bye-bye.